Um, Good evening and welcome to the second of four lectures that comprise the recently launched DEI lecture series for the fall and spring academic term. Tonight's panel is titled Voting Rights, Protecting the Right to Vote and How Appropriate. The 2020 DEI lecture series, next slide please, is supported by the Rogow Distinguished Visiting Lecturer Program, which brings celebrated authors, journalists, historians, academics, and artists to campus in the greater Hartford area. The series is part of the wide array of public programming that the University of Hartford offers, fulfilling an important responsibility to serve the larger community of which it is a part. Our moderator for tonight's panel is Dr. Bilal Sekou. Dr. Bilal Debris Sekou is an associate professor of political science in the Hillier College at the University of Hartford. His research interests are race and politics, urban politics and campaigns, elections, and voting behavior. Dr. Sekou has published articles on social and political participation by African Americans and public attitudes toward quality and integrated education in Connecticut. Dr. Sekou was born in Detroit, Michigan. He received a Bachelor's of Science in Public Administration and Governmental Economics from Eastern Michigan University and earned his MA in Public Administration and his doctorate in Political Science from The Ohio State University. He has been teaching at the University of Hartford since the summer of 2002. As an engaged scholar over the years, Dr. Sekou has served on the boards of directors for a number of organizations, working on democracy reforms and racial economic justice, including Northeast Action, Democracy Works, Connecticut Citizens Action Group, the Connecticut Center for a New Economy, and One Connecticut. He currently serves on the board of directors for the Connecticut Mirror, Open Communities Alliance, and he is the chair of the board of directors of Common Cause in Connecticut, and also a member of the National Governing Board for Common Cause. Dr. Sekou will introduce the members of our panel tonight. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Sekou. Dr. Sekou?
Thanks a lot, Christine Grant, for that introduction. I just want to acknowledge also the work you have done to pull together this very fine lecture series and to have had the vision to guide us in the work in doing this. And so definitely want to thank you for that. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, primarily because I really know the people who are a part of this conversation and have admired their work for a number of years. The first panelist we're going to have is Karen Hobert Flynn. She has been a democracy reform activist and leader for more than 3 decades. She has served 25 plus years in state and national leadership with Common Cause and is the organization's 9th president. Also with us is the University of Hartford alumnus, Senator Doug McCrory. He has served as a state senator representing parts of Bloomfield, Hartford, and Windsor since 2017. He was first elected to the General Assembly in 2004 to represent the 7th District, which he has served for 6 full terms. And more importantly to me, he is one of my fraternity brothers and someone I've enjoyed knowing over the last couple of decades. Michelle Stockwell is focused on growing Rock the Vote's relational organizing program online and helping organizers get creative as they adapt to COVID-19. Michelle began working as a community organizer during college, and it's a pleasure to have her a part of this conversation. Later on, we'll have Sahara Williams, who will join us in asking some questions. She is of the class of 2022 and is a student regent, a member of student government, and a member of the student group Democracy Matters here at the university, and someone I just met not too long ago, but really thinks has a very bright future ahead of her. And so what I'd like to do, is to start the conversation with our guests who are here with us tonight. And I'd like to start the conversation by talking about Representative John Lewis. As we know, John Lewis, congressman and civil rights icon, died in July. Congressman Lewis said, quote, "I say from time to time that the vote is precious. It's almost sacred. It is the most powerful nonviolent tool or instrument that we have in our democratic society, and we must use it." So my first question to the panelists is to hear, do you share Representative Lewis's belief that the right to vote is the most powerful instrument we have in a democratic society, and it's something we must use? And I'll start with Senator McCrory. How about you start us off with this? Unmute yourself.
Am I unmuted? You got me? Okay, yeah. Thank you, Bilal, for putting this together. I want to thank my alma mater, University of Hartford, for putting this program on. It's so timely, so important. In regards to the comments, the statement by John Lewis, I absolutely 100% agree that in a democracy, which we in, voting is the most important civic duty we have. It's so important, and it's so important for us to engage in this process, because if you want your voices heard, every year, maybe in some cases every 2 years, you have an opportunity to go out there and cast a ballot for the person you want in office. And even if you don't do it, you're actually doing it because you're allowing others to do it for you. And that's not what democracy is about. It's extremely important. The good trouble that people like John Lewis got in so that we can enjoy the right to vote. And if it wasn't so important, people would have not or will not be doing the things they're doing to prevent certain people from participating in the process. So I honestly 100% agree that voting is probably the most fundamental civic duty we have as citizens in this country.
Karen, how about you? What are your thoughts on that question?
I agree with Senator McCrory and Representative John Lewis. As Americans, our right to vote is a privilege and a responsibility, and we need to take that responsibility seriously, ensuring that our elections are free and fair and safeguard our voting system. So it means also working to make voting more accessible so every eligible person can make their voice heard in their government. And have a voice in deciding what is right for their families, their communities, and their country.
Thank you so much. Michelle.
Yeah, I agree with everyone who's already shared. I think that voting is a foundational instrument, and it's the best tool that we have to get the people in office who will work with us. We're not always lucky to have candidates that align with us on all of our priorities. But when we turn out, we tell them that we're paying attention, that we'll hold them accountable, and then they listen to us when we protest and lobby and go to our city council meetings. So when we turn out to vote, we tell politicians that we take our rights and what happens in our communities really seriously, and voting kind of allows us to do other things that amplify our power.
Thank you so much. Those are really good answers to, I think, a really important question, because, back in August 6, 1965, the Voting Rights Act was passed into law by signed into law, by President Lyndon B. Johnson. In 2003, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in a case called Shelby County versus Holder. They found parts of this landmark civil rights bill, this landmark voting rights bill, to be unconstitutional. Can you guys talk a little bit about the impact of the Shelby County decision on voting rights? And why don't I start with Karen on this question?
Sure. That decision of the Supreme Court, they gutted one of the most powerful, successful civil rights laws ever enacted. And it was so incredibly disappointing. because there was and is significant and pervasive discrimination against all over the country. We, back in our past, we saw literacy tests, poll taxes, intimidation, and threats. And the Supreme Court, in its decision in Shelby County, said that that was years and years ago, and there is no evidence of any kind of discrimination against voters. That was wrong. And actually, literally within months of that Supreme Court decision, we started seeing states enacting all kinds of barriers for people to vote. Within 24 hours, actually, of the Shelby ruling, Texas announced that it would implement a strict photo ID law. In the years since, we have seen dozens of states put in place barriers like strict photo ID laws, which deprive millions of Americans the ability to vote. People think, look, I have a photo ID that's easy to get. It can be very difficult for a number of people to get those kinds of IDs, and they use the story that there is rampant voter fraud, which we know is not true. But we see other kind of barriers as well. There have been states that have passed proof of citizenship laws and other vote suppression efforts to try and keep people from voting. So, the Shelby decision was a terrible one. And I will say that we have been working with Congress to pass a Voting Rights Advancement Act. They had struck down this one provision, which was Section 5, which required some states with a history of racial discrimination to get pre-cleared before they passed any kind of election change, because it had to be evaluated by the Department of Justice to see if it was discriminatory. So this new rule, this new law that is in effect, is looking at states with that history and ensuring and replacing that Section 5 portion of the law that the Supreme Court gutted. So it is our hope that that is something that we could move in a new Congress in January.
And actually, we'll come back to some of those reform efforts that groups like Common Cause have been engaged in. Senator McCrory, I'm also interested in how you might have experienced that decision when it came down, and how you thought about that impact that it would have on voting rights.
Yeah, and I think Karen did a great job at explaining it. I will add that I believe Section 4 was the part that they modified, which pretty much made Section 5, what you spoke about, irrelevant. And so, and for Connecticut, it's not as much of an issue because we have pretty good laws on the books now that protect our voting rights. But in many states, especially states in the South, and I don't want to just leave it just to the South, because it happened in Wisconsin. As soon as the law was passed, Wisconsin started the foolishness with all these certain requirements to exercise your right to vote. But you're right, especially with this administration and the Department of Justice. I'm afraid they will allow states to do anything they want to suppress the rights of people to vote, and specifically people of color. But in Connecticut, we don't really have that issue that much. But there's other things you can do, other things states can do that can marginalize individuals from having the right to vote. You could pretty much draw, voter lines. That's another issue that could take place, where you can just basically freeze out a whole entire community. So drawing lines, political lines like that is another problem that we have to be conscious of in states that are not pretty much in the South. So it's not much of a problem here in Connecticut, but you have to keep your eyes open as we move forward.
Michelle, you can sort of weigh in on that question as well. I have a different question to start with you, but if you have any thoughts about that, feel free to say some things about the Shelby County decision from the vantage point of your work with Rock the Vote.
Yeah, so we know that voter suppression affects communities of color. We know that it affects young people, the elderly, people with disabilities. And since that Shelby County decision, it's been rampant in my home state of Kansas, in Georgia in 2018, where people were purged from voter rolls, polling places were closed. So, it's just so blatantly immoral, and we have a lot of work to do to root it out.
Right. That's great, because Michelle, I actually want to start with you with this next question. Young people really have the potential to be a significant political force in American politics. Millennials and some members of Gen Z make up 37% of eligible voters, right? Which is just about the same share of the electorate that baby boomers and pre-baby boomers make up. However, since the 18-year-olds gained the right to vote, young voters really have not shown up at the polls the way they were thought that they would show up at the polls. So, from your work with young people, what are some of the reasons that you think young people don't vote?
Yeah, so I think that there's a really pervasive and dangerous myth that young people are apathetic, that they don't care about voting, or that they're lazy. And I can tell you that none of those things are true, especially this year. But what does happen is that we have really inconsistent civic education in our high schools. Not every state has civic or government education. And the education doesn't prepare young people to vote oftentimes. We all learn, or most of us learn, that there are three branches of government, but we have kind of huge gaps of knowledge about what's happening at the local level, about the mechanics of voting, about how to register. And so that's part of the problem. Another part of the problem is that young people are very transient and have really inconsistent schedules. We have students who work part-time jobs. We have people who work a couple of jobs who may or may not have access to a car. We have people who have left their home state or even are moving so often, especially with COVID, that some people aren't sure when they're registering to vote where they're going to live in 3 or 6 months. And so that kind of like chaos that so many of us experience being young makes it very difficult to manage the logistics of voting, especially if you're doing it for the first time.
Thanks a lot. Senator McCrory, I know that you do a lot of work, in the Hartford community, obviously as a lawmaker, and you work a lot with young people in terms of trying to get them to register to vote. What are some of the barriers that you experience in trying to get young people to vote?
Well, I'll look at it as this, and I'm gonna look at myself when I was young, right? When I was 18 years old. Fortunately, when I was a young person, I followed what my parents did. I was taught that it's important to vote, that you have to vote, and I voted, right? Because that's what I was taught to do. Unfortunately, nowadays, many of our young people are not getting that advice. But one good thing that I see happening is what used to happen, especially when I recall when I ran for the first time in the high schools, the community, the town will come out and register every 18-year-old who wants to be registered in their high school and got them registered to vote. Now, getting them to the poll is another question. And I'll say this, young people are not dumb. If they find someone that is engaging to them, that meets their needs, so to speak, that speak their language, that speak to their issues, that's available, that make themselves available, they will come out and support them. Unfortunately, not a lot of young people run for office. I'll say this in closing. When I ran for the first time, I was assistant principal at Weaver High School. And it's a funny story. Hartford came in and registered all the 18-year-olds up throughout the city to vote, right? And they came to Weaver, and I told the kids, I'm running for office. I want you guys to register to vote. And I ran against a person that was in office for 18 years, and no one pretty much gave me a chance to win. But when I started seeing young kids riding up to the bike with their bicycles, coming to the polling place for the first time, and people were trying to pass some literature out, and they just said, "Look, I don't know about all that stuff. I'm here to vote for my principal." I came out as a 3-1 winner. So young people will get to the polls if they find somebody that appeals to them, that speak their language that they need to hear, and also who is engaging. So I am. Look at what happened with Obama. so many young people came out to vote. So if they find somebody that meets their needs, they'll get to the polls.
Thanks a lot, Senator McCrory. Karen, I know that Common Cause does a lot of work with HBCUs to engage young people as well. Could you talk a little bit about that work in the, as a way of sort of referencing this particular question?
Sure. One of the great things about our HBCU programs in North Carolina, in Georgia, Mississippi, and Maryland is it's actually year-round civic engagement. So there's absolutely work to engage and register students to vote. Our students work. We have democracy fellows who are paid people to create content, events, and other things to talk about issues that students care about. So it is both, and then they'll also do GOTV work, which is marching together to the polls. In fact, in North Carolina, really a hotbed of voter suppression, we have seen Republicans in the legislature move to eliminate early voting, souls to the polls, voting on Sundays, and actually move voting locations away from campus to make it harder for students to get there. So one of the things that the students do is they organize and march together to say, you are not going to deprive us of our voice in our democracy. But it's connected to both creating community, habit formation, that people are getting together to talk about issues like student debt. Redistricting is one of the things that they look at because we have seen over a decade really racial and partisan gerrymanders that silence people's voices and deny them a fair representation at the state legislature and in Congress. And so students have gotten active in that. So I think, people form habits and are influenced by what their peers do. And in a lot of ways, this program creates habits, and it gives students a chance to see what their friends are doing, that they're gonna rally, they're gonna protest in Moral Mondays that that we see happening in North Carolina. They're gonna work and find time to vote. And even if they have less flexible schedules or whatever else, students organize around that. And I agree also with Michelle. Voting isn't the only way to show your participation, and I see so many young voters and young people at the HBCUs and across the country engage in mass protests, Occupy movements, Black Lives Matter protests, and also social media. So social media is a great platform for social and political engagement. So to me, I am optimistic that we will continue to see a rise in voting. And in countries across the world that have an increase in voting with all of the population, you also see a rise in young people voting.
Wow. Thanks a lot. And I think we've lost Michelle, so hopefully we'll get her back. I think she's having some technological sort of problems right now. But Karen, I want to come back because you sort of alluded to the problem of voter suppression that came out of the Shelby County decision. But I want to maybe hear your insights because of the work you do at the national level and a broader sense around ways in which efforts are, going on around the country to try to suppress voting rights, and maybe just to sort of talk about some of those ways that happens.
Sure. And, I'm going to talk mostly about what we're seeing in the last year, but the truth is, I would say since 2010 and a real spike after the Shelby County ruling, we have seen efforts to suppress votes using photo ID, using proof of citizenship laws. We've seen a real escalation in voter purges. So there will be in Georgia, this was in 2018, Georgia came up with an exact match signature program that basically suspended, around 70,000 voters' ability to vote until we sued, actually, Common Cause sued with some of our allies to allow those people to vote. So, you may have signed your voter registration at the age of 20, and at the age of 60, your signature may have changed. If your signature did not exactly match what you had done as a 20-year-old, that is a kind of that would be the excuse for them to say that you cannot vote. We also see, in terms of these voter purges, Chris Kobach in Kansas, I think it was Michelle who said she's from Kansas. He was the Secretary of State. He came up with a program that would look at names. So if your name was Anthony Gutierrez, and there were a number of Anthony Gutierrez's in other states that had a similar birth date, around the same time. They would compare to other states, and they would strike you down to say that you are registered in several places. So these purges and other systems that have been used are a great way to eliminate millions of people from the voter rolls. And so that has been a huge problem. We've brought litigation, and so have others, to provide some protections against that. The other thing that you can do are things like we have in places like Connecticut. So same-day voter registration can help combat that. So that if you find you're purged and you show up to vote, and there's a problem, you can go vote at the registrar and be able to vote that same day. But I would say, what we're seeing a lot of is the ID laws, purges, and then even as we have been working to modify the rules around voting for this COVID crisis so that people can vote safely, either through absentee ballots or vote by mail. We have seen many work to add additional barriers. In North Carolina, you have to have a witness. Some states require you to have your ballot notarized, which is really ridiculous to do in a global health pandemic, or signature match rules. So all of those things create additional barriers. And when you look at whose votes are down, it's usually Black and brown voters. And in especially the exact match, we often see it is usually Black and brown voters who are denied that ability as well. So the kinds of barriers and difficulties we see may change over time depending on what is happening, but they're there and they're rampant, and it's a real problem.
Right. So, Senator McCrory, I know you mentioned that Connecticut doesn't have, these kinds of problems, but of course we've seen, Bridgeport has been a place where some really bad things have happened around absentee ballots and other sort of things. So, as you sort of look at this landscape here in Connecticut, how do you sort of see it, not necessarily in terms of efforts to suppress rights, but just problems with how our elections can occur and some of those issues?
Yeah, I'll say, well, I think one of the things that we solved about 12 years ago was the fact that we had a policy in Connecticut law that said if you were a felon, you couldn't vote, right? So we changed that law and made it okay for people who are formerly incarcerated who have felonies to vote. So that's one of the things that we did to improve opportunities for people to vote. And then we passed legislation when we doing early voting now for this particular election because of the COVID-19 situation. We made it possible for everyone to be able to vote absentee without any excuses. So we have no excuse absentee voting, absentee ballot voting. Before you didn't have that. You have to have a reason why you have to have an absentee ballot. So we changed that policy as we move forward. And again, the last piece is this gerrymandering around districts. That's something we have to keep our eyes open in Connecticut for. as we move forward also. So we have done some things to eliminate that. And yes, you mentioned Bridgeport. We have some situations where people take advantage. They do take advantage of elderly people. They take advantage of people who can't get to the polls. And that has been happening. And that has to be changed out there. In Bridgeport, there's going to be a monitor during this election. And if things don't change, I'm sure there's going to be a monitor for every election down there. So there have been some things going on, but we're trying to resurrect them and fix them as we move forward.
Thanks a lot. Thank you so much for those answers. Michelle, I think we've got you at least on audio. So I'd like to sort of throw this question at you, really thinking about the work that Rock the Vote does to engage young people. I mean, one of the things we know is that young people don't follow the news or elections as closely as they may have done in the past. And I'd like you to talk some more, especially in the context of your work, about how we can actually engage young people even more to get them interested in politics, to increase their turnout on election day. Tell me how to do
it. Great. So the way that we're engaging young people at Rock the Vote this year, and actually one of the most effective ways to do it, is through friend-to-friend outreach, which is also called relational organizing. That's really where you have long, meaningful conversations with people that you already know, your friends, your classmates, your parents, your students, and talk to them about the issues that they care about, what's at stake for them, validate the ways that they're feeling and the things that they share, and then really walk them through registering to vote, or in this case, now that we're so close to the election, walk them through making a plan to vote, saying, how are you going to vote this year? If you're voting in person, what time of day? How are you getting to the polls? Who are you bringing to the polls with you? We find really incredible results when we really walk people through step by step, and when it comes from a trusted messenger like a friend.
Guess I should remember to unmute myself as well. Another question, and pretty soon we're going to involve our student region in this conversation, Shahara. But another question, that's something that I've thought a lot about, because recently I was on a panel that dealt with the census and talked about some of the controversies around the census. And of course, we just recently, the court has ruled that the count needs to stop early. I think today was the day, in fact, that the count stopped. So in this question, I want to start with Karen on this one first. How critical to ensuring the right to vote is a fair, accurate, and complete census count of marginalized communities, including people of color, American Indians, people with low incomes, people with disabilities, LGBTQ, and also people experiencing homelessness? Why is the census count so important to the work that gets done on voting rights?
So a fair and accurate 2020 census is important for a lot of reasons. I mean, it can help identify community needs and distribute federal dollars to state and localities based on population and numbers. It's also critically important for equal political representation under the Constitution. So, what does that mean? The state legislatures take the data from the census and use it to draw district lines. And this is what Senator McCrory has been talking about. And if you are leaving huge parts of the population out of that count, their voice is going to be heard. We already know that many legislators in many states, and even Republicans do it, Democrats do it. I will say Republicans in 2010 used data with surgical precision to narrowly target communities of color and pack them together in ways that deprive them of voice. So what I mean by that is that in a state like North Carolina, where you have roughly equal population of Republicans and Democrats, with 13 congressional districts, you should have roughly a 6-7 split, probably 7 Democrats, 6 Republican districts. What they did in 2010 was to do a 10 of those congressional districts were Republican and 3 Democrats, packing everybody into that. So that means that those are such ultra safe districts that those Republicans hold, that when their citizens want to see health care, they want to see policing reforms or other reforms, their voices are not heard. Those representatives are in safe seats and they can do whatever they want because they can't be voted out. And so that is the problem. It denies people of a voice in their democracy. They may have a vote, but it dilutes it. And these legislators in safe districts, do whatever they want. In fact, I was on a panel with a Republican member of Congress who used to work for the FBI and the corruption unit. And he talked about seeing more corruption in those highly gerrymandered districts than in any other districts. And so really it is about not just the vote, it's about your voice and fair representation that is promised under the Constitution.
Thank you so much. And Senator McCrory, I know that this was an issue in terms of making sure that a fair and accurate count occurred in a city like Hartford, right? What's been your reaction to stopping this count early and the possibility that Hartford gets undercounted and people in the city you represent don't get the kind of resources that they should get?
Yeah, that can be very problematic because I don't think there was any warning that this was going to happen. I don't think people had any lead up to this. It was a decision that was made in the dark, and it can be very troubling because, like what Sid mentioned, a lot of policies and financial support resources are provided to communities based on that census data. And if we don't have accurate data, that will leave the community in a loss for resources that it pretty needs. That census data will determine what kind of schools you have, the number of schools you have. It can dictate even how many hospitals you need in the area. It can dictate a number of things. And if you don't have an accurate account, it can be detrimental. And we all know historically, large urban communities have always been undercounted. They've always been undercounted for years. And with this coronavirus in the middle of while we're trying to do this count, I know I get a sense that it's going to be another undercounting of the number of people that live in our communities in cities like Hartford. So I'm really concerned. I'm really concerned because I'm really concerned about the lack of resources that a marginalized community is already in a situation where it's marginalized and don't have the resources. And then on top of that, for the next 10 years, because this census data is not just for 1 year, it's going to affect us for the next 10 years. So you think about if you're starting from a point of reduced resources already, those reductions are going to continue for the next 9 years until you get another census count. So I'm very concerned about it, not just in Hartford, but in a lot of large urban areas in Connecticut, but even also in many of our rural areas in Connecticut and places outside of Connecticut.
Thank you so much. And certainly your job as a lawmaker is made much more difficult when you're unable to fight for those resources that the people in your city need.
I give you another example. It can affect the district lines, and it can affect the number of representatives you have from Hartford, right? So if the population goes down based on this census count, you can lose representation from the city of Hartford. So it really is it could be very detrimental. If you lose representation, that means you lose a voice. Our legislature is already run by the serving my suburban colleagues, because so many of them. And if we continue not to get the right accurate count, you'll continue to lose people from our large urban areas.
Right. Michelle, I think, but Sarah, why don't you sort of ask some questions now?
Okay, so I see there's a couple in the chat, should I hit those first, or should I have a couple of my own as well? I think particularly for Michelle first, I want to ask you. I know that increasingly now because of social media, a lot of younger people are becoming more active and more politically aware. And I was wondering how you felt about this push, especially in places like San Francisco, to change the voting age to 16 for younger people to vote in local elections. And I'm just thinking about that.
That's a great question. So I think that we're seeing really incredible engagement especially from Gen Z on social media platforms like TikTok, where people are educating their peers about the issues they care about and voicing their opinions and even doing little explainer videos. Um, so this is a very, very exciting time for politics, and like the key into education and relational friend-to-friend outreach is really making sure that all of our outreach to young people is digital first and really like meets people where they are on these social platforms with nonpartisan or just factual educational resources. And then to that point of lowering the voting age for local elections, I think that's a fantastic idea. I think that young people, when they are lucky enough, especially to have a civic education in their classes or after school programming that touches on the issues that affects their lives, they really have a clear pulse on what they need in their community. And, I think that would also help them start a really healthy habit of voting while they're at home that they can continue, when they get into their late teens and mid 20s when life is a little more chaotic and voting is a little bit more challenging. So that's a great question, and I'm all for it.
Okay, great. Thank you. And it's really nice to hear. Okay, I see that Marshall Rolnick wrote in the chat that most millennials do not change their domicile every time they move from place to place, particularly while they're in college. Therefore, they can vote by absentee ballot if they really care about our democracy. From what I hear from young eligible voters, they don't vote or register to vote because it's the last thing on their bucket list to do. And I guess I am a young eligible voter. I am 20 years old and a junior in college, so I would give my 2 cents on this. Well, I think I completely agree. Like, there's so many things. Michelle had brought up this point before that, like, life is crazy, life is hectic. It's really hard to get out and vote. But I also think representation is a very big issue that, now that this is my first presidential election, I turned 18 in 2018. So this is the first presidential election I'll be able to vote in. And there are 2 white men over 70 that I get to choose from. And when you watch these debates and you see them on TV, they're talking about protecting jobs in the fossil fuel industry. I know that last debate, Joe Biden explicitly said, like, I'm not going to support the Green New Deal, which, that is something that's very important for young people, climate change, because in 50 years, I'm going to be alive and you're not. So I feel like that's where a lot of the apathy comes from. I don't know if anybody else has anything they'd like to say on that. They'd like to chime in on young people not wanting to vote. If not, I will move on to Joshua Keller's point.
Give him a moment to chime in.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm like ready to go. I see so much getting anxious, but yeah, would anybody like to say anything?
Hear me? I got up for a minute. I didn't hear all of it, but I did hear you say about two older white men on the stage. And honestly, I'll be honest with you. I kind of understand. I'm not. I'm gonna be honest with you. I understand exactly what you're talking about, because if they're not talking about the issues that you, as an 18-year-old, that are germane to you, then it makes you like, do I really want to go out there and vote? But you're a smart young lady, college student, you get it. But your friends might not think like you. So it's very important, very important that you have candidates that speaks to the issues that everyone is concerned about. And sometimes, I know you mentioned something about climate change. I'll tell you this: when you're running for office and it's a tight race like this, sometimes you just gotta say things so your opponent won't go after you, right? I honestly believe that the people around Biden understand the importance of climate change, right? And I believe once he's elected, those issues, specifically that issue, which is so important to our Earth, will be addressed.
Thank you. Okay, now, if that's all from anybody chiming in, Joshua Keller was asking, I think at this point we were talking about gerrymandering, this point in the conversation. So the question.
It's really hard to hear you, Michelle, so we're having problems with your audio right now. Yeah. So go ahead, Sarah. Yeah.
Yes, and then Michelle, if she gets her thing, if she ever gets it together, then she can feel free to answer. But this is in regards to gerrymandering. Does this indicate that district values should be removed in favor of total area popular voting? Similarly, should the Electoral College be removed?
I can take that. So in terms of the Electoral College, I think it is a vestige historically that makes no sense for us. There was a compromise that gave southern states more power in the Electoral College. It is not something that I think reflects democracy. We have, for other races, we look at the popular vote. For the president, we look at electoral votes. So what we have are presidential candidates that focus in a handful of battleground states. Those voters are the ones that matter. And the rest of the states, Connecticut included, are flyby states. Common Cause supports the National Popular Vote Compact, which is an interstate compact. There are thousands of interstate compacts. And interestingly, Republicans love interstate compacts. This compact would say that if a state signs on to this, and Connecticut has, and many other states have, equaling, I think, about 201 electoral votes, that once they get to 270 electoral votes, states that sign the compact and say, we will allocate our electors, because states decide how to allocate their electors, to the winner of the national popular vote rather than the winner of their state, then we will have, then we will be able to have the winner of the popular vote for the presidency win the election. You could eliminate the Electoral College and do it by constitutional amendment, but that is a lengthy process that would take a lot of time. And the Electoral College reform measure, National Popular Vote, has been working its way through state legislatures and has had real momentum, winning in a number of states just this year. And I think that we could get over the top in the next 2 years. Unfortunately, weren't able to get it through for this year. So to me, I think that would be a significant reform. And especially in this year where we have a president who has already said that he thinks if he loses that there was some kind of fraud, and it seems quite likely he will challenge election results. I think there will be games played with the Electoral College.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else have anything to say on that matter? Okay, now to the next question from Megan Fazio. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. What message would you share with anyone, but young voters in particular, who think that their vote doesn't matter, especially in a solid blue or red state? Thanks for doing this panel. I guess I would like to also add my little 2 cents here, that blue and red are very much kind of like, it's more of a perception than an actuality. A lot of states end up being purple, because when we vote, we don't just vote for like the president. We have so many offices all the way down. There's different parts. Coming from New York State is a blue state, but when you look at New York City versus rural New York, we have a huge farming community, a lot of working class communities that live in rural areas that tend to lean more right or red. So I think it's very much important to emphasize that regardless of what you think of a perception of a whole state is, there's so many smaller elections that matter that'll affect your everyday life. And voting is also just a really good gesture to show that you care. And, if you get enough people on board, they really do count, especially in those smaller elections. And would anybody else like to? Oh, Michelle, you're back. This is about young voters too. So if you'd like to answer this, feel free.
Michelle, are you there?
Look like she's out again.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, do you mind if I say something? I hear this a lot from a lot of people, not just young voters, that, people's votes don't make a difference. There are so many elections where it comes down to a handful of votes, and those votes can matter. In 2017, there was a tie race, 23,000 votes, and it was a tie, and the who would control the Virginia House of Delegates rested in the balance. Different states, when you have a close vote like that, deal with it. It was a tied, some could have a runoff election. In Virginia, unfortunately, they do what's essentially like tossing a coin to decide who takes the seat. And one more voter showing up could have made the difference in terms of who controlled that state house. People's votes matter, and we see it again and again and again. And not just around voting. I have been involved in the Democratic reform space for 35 years, and I can count more times than I could list here how people's voices make a difference, not just in elections, but also how they engage and push for reforms in their state. And I saw it in my more than 10 years in Connecticut. We talk about problems cropping up other places, and Senator McCrory saying, well, actually, that's not a problem we have. There is a long list of reforms that activists and young activists have helped pass in Connecticut around voting, around money in politics, around giving people a voice in their democracy. And to step back and not participate, and this goes for young and old voters, gives us the democracy we deserve, which is right now, we have one that is, our democracy is backsliding, and we can do something about it. We can do something. It doesn't matter what Trump says in terms of all the tricks he wants to play. If people turn out and vote, and frankly, vote him out of office, that is an incredibly powerful tool. Not that we don't have a lot of work to do, but people's voices do make a difference.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. And just to that too, voting, you really make history with it. I really like the idea that, we can change everything. The first time I voted in 2018, I was able to vote the first Black man from upstate to New York into Congress, Antonio Delgado. He's also, I think, the first person of Hispanic descent as well, and New York's first Black female attorney general. So that was really important for me. I think that we really do take voting for granted sometimes, but you can really make history and really get put yourself out there and get the representation that you want. So thank you so much. And
We've probably got about a minute left. So
yeah, I actually think that's it with the question. So yeah. I think this part is done. I think I'm good. I said what I need to say. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much, Sarah, for those great questions and also great comments to people. I guess in the little bit of time we have left, if there's sort of a quick closing comment that all of our panelists would like to try to get in. I'm not sure if Michelle is still having technology issues, but if she's not, to get in a quick closing comment that you want to communicate to our community about voting rights.
Yeah, hopefully my audio is coming through right now. I want to thank University of Hartford for having us and Sahara for those amazing questions and great facilitation. I think it's important that we don't count young people out, that in our communities, just even with the people we know personally, with our students, with our friends, with our peers, that we engage them in a conversation and use ourselves as educational resources to walk them through the process.
Thanks a lot. Karen.
Yes. So one is I urge every single person who is with us today to make a plan to vote. Whether you vote by absentee ballot, make sure you get that ballot and send it in or take it to a drop box as quickly as you can. If you are in a state where you can vote early, vote early. If you are going to vote in person on election day, go early, bring the mask and the Purell and the other things you need to be able to vote safely, and you wait in that line. Don't get out of that line because they will have to let you vote. Stay in the line. And if you want to help,
never taking someone for granted or assuming someone doesn't want to
Yeah, I'm not sure what's happening there, but finish your comment, Karen. Thanks.
Okay. If you want to help other people with voting, we have an election protection coalition and a hotline, 186-OUR-VOTE. If you have any trouble, call that and it can help you. And if you would like to be somebody that is a poll monitor, that monitors social media for disinformation and works to take it down to protect people's rights, you can go to protectthevote.net and volunteer along with 35,000 others across the country to be putting yourself out there remotely or in person to ensure that people's rights to vote are allowed. So protectthevote.net. Don't go to protectthevote.com because some right-wing groups have captured that. So protectthevote.net. Thanks.
Senator McCrory, very quickly, any last comments?
I'll just say, please, folks, get out and vote, especially you young people. And when you don't vote, you do vote. I explain this to fourth graders. 10 people coming up. You got 10 on this side, 10 on this side. Election time. If that 10 on the blue side and they got 10 on the red side, if one of those people on the blue side say, you know what, I just don't feel like going today. Guess what happened? You just voted. You voted to let the other person win. So when you don't vote, you actually are voting. You're voting for the opposite person that you wanted. So I'll just say, please make sure you get yourselves out there and vote. This is a very important election. And like someone said earlier, it's not just the president you're voting for. And there's a term that we use in politics. All politics is local. If you want stuff changed in your community, you got to get out there and vote.
Thank you so much to all of the panelists. Thank you so much, Sahara, for, again, your comments and your also questioning as well. I think we have some closing slides, so can we get them up? Okay. So, obviously, one of the things to announce is that we're going to do a voter registration drive here on campus. We've got a great Office of Student Engagement and Inclusion that will host that voter registration drive. And so it will take place on Friday, October 16th, 12 to 2:30 on the Commons patio. And there's a link on there. You can learn more about it. And this information will also be shared on the DEI website, so you'll be able to link on it there. Maybe the next slide. Right. And we've got, other great lecture, dates coming up. On February 11th, we've got a health equity and communities of color discussion that will take place. And on March 25th, we're doing policing, campuses, and communities of color. So 2 really great, events. And again, I want to thank Christine Grant for leading us in this effort to put together this fine lecture series. And hopefully you have learned tonight that we've got some great minds that are working to make access to the vote and to protect voting rights that are out there, and also young people who are coming forth to do that work as well. We've got some resources that people have sort of talked about. I know that Karen mentioned the protectthevote.net site, and also we've got some information about Rock the Vote that's up there as well. I'm sort of seeing in the chat that we've got, we'll be offering shuttles to polling locations and other things. So University of Hartford does a lot of work to make sure our students get out there and have an opportunity to vote. And I'm so happy to be a part of this effort. So thank you so much. There's contact information for everyone who has been involved in this conversation tonight. And, take a look at that information. And of course, again, this will be made available on the DEI website that you will be able to see on the University of Hartford's website. So once again, thanks to everyone for a great conversation and a great contribution. Thanks to the people who were out there listening, and hopefully you learned a lot. I learned a lot, and I'm excited about, protecting this right to vote through the work I do with Common Cause and other organizations. And thank you so much. Good night.